Hellas, also known as Greece. Each day, thousands of tourists visit temples and monuments built to honor the gods of another age. The Acropolis, Delphi, the Parthenon, the Temple of Apollo. These ancient sites reflect a powerful reverence for beings that supposedly ruled the world thousands of years ago.
When you look at many of the mythologies around the world, they have these stories of gods coming down from the sky.
There's a beautiful description of the way that the gods move, like when they kind of come down to the earth. You get this sense of them gliding down, but the way that they move is kind of beyond time. It just kind of happens.
If the ancient Greeks invented the stories of gods as a primitive attempt to explain their universe, how can we account for similar deities found in widely different regions and cultures around the globe? Was it mere coincidence? Or was there a common origin for these gods, who supposedly traveled to Earth from the skies?
The earliest civilization we have, 3800 BC, the Sumerians actually give us visual descriptions of these beings and speak of this time that they lived amongst their living gods. They called their gods the Anunnaki, and that term simply meant those who from heaven come to earth.
Mythology is chock full of these episodes of gods coming down to earth. I mean, because mythology is so interested in the relationship between gods and humans, there is necessarily going to be a lot of communication and communion between the two of them.
In his book, Odyssey of the Gods, Eric von Daniken argues that the world's sacred books are full of descriptions, not of gods, but of supernatural beings interacting with humans.
Some thousands of years ago, when our forefathers were still primitive, some extraterrestrials descended to our planet. And because of misunderstanding, lack of technology, our forefathers thought that these extraterrestrials must be some gods.
Mount Olympus, Greece's highest mountain. According to ancient myths, this site was the home of the gods. It was here on Mount Olympus that Zeus sat on his throne and determined the fate of mortal men.
Whenever we have references to Mount Olympus, it is described to be this magnificent palace on top of Mount Olympus, allegedly, and the temple walls were always gleaming of gold or gleaming with silver, and a lot of little lights that they described as jewels. Well, if you look at that from a modern perspective, what if that place, Mount Olympus, wasn't necessarily the top of a mountain, but it was in fact a spaceship? Because it is described how sometimes there was a big rumbling with Mount Olympus and the entire top lifted off.
But if Mount Olympus was home to alien visitors, could Zeus have been their leader? According to both the Iliad and the Odyssey, Zeus was often depicted as wielding a lightning bolt.
It appears to be a very powerful weapon because he could destroy whole cities with this thunderbolt weapon of his.
Similarly, Zeus's brother Poseidon, the god of the sea, was armed with a trident.
He was able to create tsunamis, tidal waves, with this weapon. The trident weapon of Poseidon seems to have been something more than just a pitchfork.
So is it possible that the lightning bolt and the trident is some type of a direct energy device?
Arguably one of the most important of the Greek gods was Apollo, who rode the skies in his chariot of fire.
Apollo first was the teacher of the young Greeks living there. He teach them how to make buildings on the mountain, on the hillside. He teach them how to make roads. He teach them in astronomy.
Centuries later, when Rome ruled over Europe and the Mediterranean, from the 1st century BC until the 7th century AD, the Romans paid homage to gods similar to the Greeks. Zeus was now known as Jupiter. Poseidon was called Neptune. But Apollo was known to both the Romans and the Greeks. Coincidence? Or, as most ancient astronaut theorists believe, was it the historical account of powerful beings that came to Earth thousands of years ago?
We know that the extraterrestrials more than likely are the source of what they call gods. How did they get here? More than likely in some type of craft.
What we map into our myths and in our legends are incredible stories, incredible events, and any extraterrestrial being, any ancient alien who has come here on Earth will be written down into this account because it is such an extraordinary event that it will be marked forever.
But if the stories of Greek and Roman gods are true, can evidence of their existence be found in other parts of the globe? And if so, where did they go? Lindisfarne, England, 793 AD. Several hundred Viking raiders make landfall on this small tidal island off the coast of Northumbria to plunder a great monastery of its rumored treasures. An account of the attack on Lindisfarne says the assault coincided with extraordinary whirlwinds, lightning, and fiery dragons crisscrossing the skies. Could these strange events be coincidence? Or could it be evidence that otherworldly forces may have been allied with the Vikings? Ancient astronaut theorists believe the answer can be found by examining the divine beings that form the basis of Norse religion and mythology.
The Norse gods were worshipped over a very wide range of time and space throughout Northern Europe, from the continental German lands, through the British Islands, the far northern islands such as Iceland and Greenland, and all throughout Scandinavia.
Because little information has survived related to the origin of the Norse or Viking gods, modern scholars depend on a pair of Icelandic books written several hundred years after the Viking Age, called the Eddas.
And so we find that there's the god Odin, the god Frey, the god Thor. Those are probably the best known, but there are a bunch of other supporting gods who flesh out this mythology. The gods live in a world of their own, but it's closely connected to the world of men.
The Norse had some of the richest descriptions and references to the cosmos. In fact, they referred to the cosmos as Yggdrasil, meaning the tree of life. That was the symbol of their idea of the cosmos. And they were very specific in stating that their cosmos contained 9 different worlds, one of which is ours, the Earth.
We often hear about the 9 worlds of the Nordic mythological realm. There's Asgard, and that's the home of the gods Thor and Odin. There's the world of humans. We call this Middle Earth or Midgard. If we go step a little bit further outside of Asgard and Midgard, we confront Jotunheim, or the land of the giants. We'll encounter Muspel, which is an area of fire. We'll encounter Niflheim, which is another world where the frost ogres live. We'll encounter Alfheim, which is where the elves live.
According to the Eddas, Asgard was home to the most powerful of the gods. It is described as a beautiful and peaceful realm, full of glimmering halls and fertile fields cut by shimmering rivers.
Odin is the chief of the gods. He lives in the highest of the heavens, Asgard. He had one eye. He had given up an eye to drink of the water of truth. And so he has this depth of wisdom. So he's a warrior god, able to bring fury and danger to the enemies.
Odin was the god that gave people written language in the runes. He was the god that gave them the poetic mead. He was the god that gave them many aspects of what would be considered a sort of noble way of life.
But was Odin perhaps something other than a mythical deity? Could he have actually existed? And if so, how? Ancient astronaut theorists believe clues to Odin's true identity may lie in the myths describing his two ravens, Hugin and Munin.
Odin's ravens were his scouts. They were his research team. Hugin and Munin represent thought and memory. So Odin had these scouts, these spy satellites that would go out and see what he needed to learn for today's activities.
According to Norse legends, every morning Odin sent out his two magical ravens, Hugin and Munin, and at night those ravens would return and he would listen to them and they would tell him everything that they observed throughout the entire day.
Scholars believe Odin's two ravens, translated as thought and memory, were simply mythological creations. But is it possible that Hugin and Munin were actually something else, something perhaps more technological?
Whenever he wanted to observe other worlds, find out what they were doing, he would send these two ravens out, and they would be like spy drones or something, and they would go to these other countries and then come back to Odin and report to him what was going on. And it would seem like what Odin had was some kind of spy planes or spy drones that he was sending out, much as we do today.
And the question is whether the Norse really stated that these were ravens, or whether they were instead something else, that they were somehow flying objects. So we have details here of something mythical, of ravens being able to speak to the gods, or the ravens as some kind of spy drone or some other kind of spy satellite technology by which Odin is able to get information.
Cape Sunion, Greece. Perched on the headland, surrounded on three sides by the sea, lies the ruins of the temple of Poseidon, built in 440 BC. The second son of the Titan king Cronus, Poseidon was worshipped throughout Greece, almost as much as his younger brother, Zeus.
Poseidon was the god of the sea. He was also the god of earthquakes and, strangely, horses. When Poseidon was in a good mood, he created new lands out of the sea. He gave calm waters for good voyages. When he was in a bad mood, he destroyed ships and brought storms.
Poseidon does rule over the kingdom of the sea. It is envisioned as a kind of a place where people live. And when he comes out of that place, yes, he rides this spectacular kind of like water chariot that is driven by dolphins, and he holds onto a really big trident.
In Greek mythology, Cronus eats all of his children, except for Zeus, who eventually rescues his siblings, including Poseidon, from the belly of his father.
A potion is prepared that makes him heave up all the other siblings of Zeus, and they become the gods of Olympus.
But ancient astronaut theorists believe this Greek myth is actually a metaphor for an extraterrestrial event. They believe the notion of gods being vomited up from the belly of their father actually describes mutinous aliens being expelled from the mothership.
Any being which is swallowed up into a living creature will not be able to survive for 3 days. It will die from suffocation and will begin to decay. So what we have here is not a creature, but something else. It could have been an object which was clearly of a man-made or extraterrestrial origin.
A mutiny took place. Some of the extraterrestrials, they had sex with wonderful earthly females, women. They were not allowed to do this. So one of these extraterrestrials who were not allowed to go back with the mother spaceship had the name of Poseidon. Poseidon fell in love with a beautiful human girl, and he made her pregnant.
Poseidon is married, right? He's got a child. He's got some grandchildren, right? There's a whole cast of sea nymphs as well. All of them presumably like live in this place.
Poseidon has the power of the deep, the unseen place. If you look out at the sea, you see a surface, and you're aware there's a whole world below that, suggesting powers beyond that which meet the eye.
Among the mythical creatures associated with Poseidon are the Telkines, a race of advanced fish children. These human-like beings could live both in and out of water.
There are masters of technology and seem to match up with the fish gods of ancient Sumeria who worked for Enki, the great god of alchemy and technology and smithcraft.
The Telkines are also kind of in the shadowy territory of god, human, monster things. They're just these kind of figures who are not gods, but who are like human beings. There's one story about the Roman version of Zeus, Jupiter, trying to destroy them. Now, we don't know whether they are actually all destroyed, but it's possibly because of their relationship to the magic.
In Greek legend, the Telkines were also metallurgists. They were said to have created Poseidon's magical trident and to have cast the first bronze statues of the gods of Olympus. And according to some historians, the Telkines may not have been creatures of myth, but were beings who actually existed.
There were people called Telkines. We do actually have evidence of these beings. They were actual ancient Greeks who had specific tasks and trades, like metallurgy, like smithing, and so on. And so you could see how it is that a being like Telkines, that these things could in fact not just be these mythological beings, but like actual people. So the way that we look at the ancient Greeks and Romans would have been the way that they would have looked at the stories that are being told about the Iliad.
We've got the stories of the Telkines, and they were able to survive underwater for unlimited amounts of time. Now, how is such a thing possible unless you have access to some type of technology? An Israeli company is currently developing a human artificial gill system that allows humans to take oxygen from surrounding water without the need of oxygen tanks. You potentially can remain underwater for unlimited amounts of time. All the technology that we are discovering today is in fact old news. It's been around before.
Over 1,000 miles north of Karnak lies Scandinavia, home to an ancient people called the Norse. The Norse were tribal Germanic people who lived in what is now known as Sweden, Denmark, Iceland, and Norway. Norse legends record the triumphs of great warriors with advanced weaponry, sophisticated combat techniques, and navigational prowess. Like the Greeks, Norse mythology includes supernatural beings, other worlds, and powerful gods. But like the Romans, could the Norse myths refer not to different gods, but the same gods as those depicted by the ancient Greeks?
There are a number of similarities between Greek mythology and Norse mythology, and many of the gods are almost identical, and they do much the same thing.
Descriptions of the Viking god Odin, the god of war, death, and knowledge, and the Greek god Zeus bear striking similarities.
Zeus and Odin are both sky father gods. They travel through the skies in chariots because they are akin to the solar divinities. The precursor to many religious beliefs is sun worship. The ancients knew that life came from the sun. So that is a great mystery and a source of great awe.
What you're getting there is not just some minor deity, but you really are nailing it down to one of the chief deities. This is a very important character. And so whoever is behind Odin or Zeus is obviously a person or a divine entity which is shared by these cultures. And it's clear that whoever inspired the myth of Zeus or Odin is somehow somebody who had an extremely important contribution to make to both civilizations. So this entity was definitely known throughout Europe.
Ancient alien theorists also point to similarities between the sophisticated weapons possessed by both the Norse and the Greek gods. Among Odin's weapons was a spear that never missed its target. The Norse god Thor, god of storms, strength, and fertility, wielded a powerful hammer.
Right there we have a correlation, a connection, because not only does Zeus have the thunderbolt, but what does Odin have and Thor? They have a hammer. Thor has a hammer with which he can smash things, destroy things, and, you know, the hammer idea is pretty close with the description to the lightning rod that Zeus has.
So you have to wonder if these tales of Zeus's thunderbolts, Thor's hammer, if these weren't real weapons, just like we have today, where we have directed energy beam weapons or are developing some kind of literal thunderbolt coming out of a spacecraft.